Of the House Education Committee to order. I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed for the members of the public. For members participating virtually, please mute your microphones, and for those attending in person, please silence all your electronic devices. I am reminding myself. Okay, cool. And we will now take attendance. Tom, if you'll be so kind.
Chairman Schweier.
Here.
Representatives Abney, Curry,
Designation.
Friel.
Here.
Isaacson.
Here.
Kazim.
Designation.
Nelson. O'Mara.
She's online, so designation.
Friel Otten.
Designation.
Probst.
Online by designation.
Prokopiak. Smith Waddell.
Designation.
Takak.
Designation.
Yun.
Okay, thank you. She's here.
Chairman Cutler.
Present.
Representatives Anderson. Cooper. Diorsi. Gleim. Kozak. McKenzie. Ortitai. Rosel.
Present.
Schlegel.
Designation.
Shalaba.
Designation.
Watro. A quorum is present.
Thank you, sir. Having established a quorum, we will be considering one resolution right now. We are going to consider House Resolution 169, printers number 1242 by Representative Mirsky. Kate, if you'll be so kind.
H.R. 169 from Representative Mirsky designates the month of September 2025 as Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Month in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this resolution? Seeing none, very quickly, I will say, I don't always, I'll speak entirely for myself and take responsibility for this. We don't always work ahead on our resolutions, and sometimes we're passing a resolution in June that was supposed to be like April. We're going to try to do a better job of that, so we're going to continue to look at resolutions coming through that are, I would say, largely agreed upon. I certainly won't speak for Chair Cutler, but try to get these moving as quickly as possible so that we're actually able to pass them in the before we're celebrating something. So that's the intention of this one. I appreciate a yes vote and roll call. We'll do a roll call, Tom.
Chairman Schweier.
Yes.
Representatives Abney. Oh my God. Stand by.
Take your time, Tom. Take a breath. I will say all Democrats will be a yes. That much I can do. So with that, I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. That's the way to do it. All Democrats are yes, Tom.
Okay. Chairman Cutler.
Yes.
Representatives Anderson. Yes. Cooper. Yes. Diorsi. Gleim. Yes. Kozak. McKenzie.
Designation, yes.
Ortitai. Yes. Rosel. Yes. Schlegel.
Designation, yes.
Shalaba.
Designation, yes.
Watro. Yes. The yeas are 26, the nays are 0. The resolution passes.
Thank you very, very much. Now, I would like to call for a motion under other business to consider House Bill 1500, printers number 1795. Is there a motion? It's been motioned by Representative Isaacson and seconded by Representative Friel. Thank you both. Kate, will you be so kind and read a summary of House Bill 15?
House Bill 1500 by Representative Isaacson amends the public school code to implement reforms to the Commonwealth Cyber Charter School system. It sets a flat statewide tuition rate of $8,000 for non-special education students with annual adjustments tied to the property tax growth or Act 1 index. Additionally, the bill aligns the statewide special education tuition rate for cyber charter schools with existing tuition rate categories used by school districts. It also creates a cyber charter school funding and policy council to review policy and funding practices. The bill prohibits cyber charter schools from maintaining unassigned fund balances exceeding 12% of total expenditures and requires them to remit excess funds from their unassigned and capital projects funds to the Public School Facility Improvement Grant Program. The bill prohibits cyber charter schools from offering enrollment incentives and restricts enrollment if designated for comprehensive support and improvement. The bill further imposes new transparency and oversight requirements, including residency verification for enrolled students, disclosure of facility ownership and leases, and identification of capital project financing sources. The legislation also implements requirements to ensure student participation in welfare and requires cyber charter schools to become subject to competitive bidding and procurement requirements. Lastly, House Bill 1500 increases the Special Education Contingency Fund for Extraordinary Expenses allocation to 2% of the state's annual special education appropriation.
Thank you. The question is, will the committee report House Bill 1500? On that question, are there any members that would like to be recognized? And I do see Representative McKenzie has joined us. You would like to kick it off, sir? Chairman Cutler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, obviously this was a subject of several hearings that we had. I appreciated the opportunity to have those hearings and solicit input across the Commonwealth. But I think it's important for the public to understand some of the timeline regarding this proposal and what has happened since those hearings and during those hearings. On April 25th, we had our first informational hearing on student outcomes in Lancaster. On May the 2nd, we had the hearing in Johnstown on cyber school costs. And on the 8th, we had the informational meeting in Stroudsburg on the governance. The voting meeting was originally, the bill number was noticed on LDP. The email was sent to the members with the intent to vote on Monday, but the language was not available as of 5/27. On 5/28, the prime sponsor emailed the members with a copy of the co-sponsorship memo, indicating the language would be available the next day, and it was not. On May the 29th, the bill number was removed from the notice on LDP, and a new resolution was added, which we just passed unanimously. No email was sent to the committee members updating them necessarily of this change, and the language for House Bill 1500 was actually not publicly available. Though when we got to later in the day, the chamber chose to add an extra voting day, non-session on May the 30th to accommodate the expedited floor action before the bill was introduced or referred to committee. House Bill 1500 was formally introduced late on Friday afternoon and immediately added to the House voting schedule for Tuesday at 4:20 p.m. The committees were notified at that time that the bill was added to the agenda for today's meeting at 4:30. Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to promote you quite yet.
Oh, for the love of God. I don't know if that's a promotion, sir, but thank you.
Having had the job, we can discuss that. It comes with its challenges. But, Mr. Chairman, I thought that the hearings were a good start. I thought we had the opportunity for input. We heard a lot on the governance and, more importantly, the impacts on our students across the Commonwealth. And when I see this timeline and the 60,000 students that will ultimately be impacted by this and their families who, for whatever reason, choose cyber school or a hybrid model, I think that it falls woefully short. I think that our students deserve the opportunity for input. I think they deserve the opportunity to be heard. I recognize that the main thrust of this bill is a statewide rate. That statewide rate has been in flux amongst the different people, the prime sponsor, the former governor. It has varied from $8,000 to $9,500. But when we review the testimony from the hearings, I think it's important that many of our traditional 500 school districts themselves also have cyber programs. Those programs and the costs that are associated with that, I don't believe are necessarily properly accounted for, artificially lowering those numbers. We had one superintendent who admitted that it was essentially the cost of technology, but not the cost of content creation. I happen to believe that there probably is a compromise here where we could agree to allowing increased opportunities for students, not otherwise inhibited by union contracts and the necessity of providing correction on site. They could, as we heard at the testimony in Johnstown, have opportunities for a language that otherwise would not be offered at their school, psychology classes, because that's ultimately what she wants to go to in her college pursuit, but that was not offered at her small rural high school. Mr. Chairman, I actually think this will disparately impact not just the small rural schools, but also the very urban schools that it's attempting to help. Many of these students have deliberately chosen, whether it be for mental health, public safety, or ease of access to alternative content, they have chosen to pursue this remedy. I believe strongly that they deserve a better outcome than what this proposal is. Now, I recognize that it is budget time. I recognize that this bill will likely be the discussion as we head into that area, which is what is necessitating the expedited time frame. But I do believe that all members should have the opportunity to actually amend and be involved in that discussion, much like we were during the hearings. And unfortunately, this bill with this scheduling falls well short of that. So I will be asking my members to please vote in the negative. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And in my haste there, I should have called on the maker of the legislation, Representative Isaacson. My apologies, ma'am. But if I would like to recognize you to talk more about your legislation, if you would be so kind.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to respond to the last speaker, I apologize on behalf of LRB and trying to get it out. Certainly during this time of the year, things get delayed. And so, unfortunately, with the greatest intent, when I sent out my reminder email, it was with the understanding we would be getting it forthcoming, and unfortunately that didn't happen, which is why it got introduced when it did. But certainly we have it in front of us today, and as I started this discussion with regard to the legislation I intended to introduce, which I have, 487 school districts of 500 in this Commonwealth have passed resolutions asking for cyber charter reform. These are making unstable situations for the school districts in their budgeting process, and there needs to be some sort of oversight, uniformity, and making sure that our cyber charter schools, which are public schools since they are receiving and funded by public money, to have the oversight of the Department of Education and come into parity with all other public schools and the requirements that those schools have to conform with. And certainly we're going to have a discussion, as we did during our hearings, with regard to what the funding level should be. But as the governor laid out in his budget address all the way back in February, starting this discussion, that he was looking at this $8,000 mark, and that's where we're starting. And as you pointed out, Chairman Cutler, this is budget season. It's June. We have a budget that we should be settling on by June 30th. So we need to get this process started, and where it would be wonderful if we had more time to do it. We need to get this done and get it over the Senate so that certainly whatever revisions and comments and they want to put into the bill will be taken up, and we all have schedules in both chambers that have to be met. And so again, I understand where you're asking your members, but also I hope that all the members of this committee have participated or at least read the testimony that was submitted during the 3 hearings that we had across the state, and taken into consideration much of the information that was provided and the requests for this cyber charter school reform that has been requested by, again, 487 out of 500 school districts in this Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Glein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since being elected, House Bill 1500 is at least the 3rd attempt to do away with cyber charters in Pennsylvania. One bill years ago attempted to cap cybers at just 4 statewide, eliminating the other 10. So we know what the end goal is here. Some colleagues may dispute this statement by saying that they're just capping the amount leaving public schools, but we know that the $8,000 figure used in the bill would eliminate outside charters and relegate students to their home district cyber program. After requesting several times if an economic impact study was done or asking where the $8,000 cap came from, no reasonable answer was given. Some said that the $8,000 came from the amount it costs a public school to house their own cyber, which obviously doesn't account for, as the chairman said, any overhead costs of teachers, administration, etc. Therefore, it does eliminate outside charters. On June 1, 1925, over 100 years ago yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that parents have the right and responsibility to choose the school that is best for their children. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clark McReynolds stated that the child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. With over 60,000 students participating in Cybers in Pennsylvania today, and countless teachers teaching them, only Pennsylvania would go backwards over 100 years, moving in the opposite direction of the rest of the nation. My colleagues, who are proponents of this legislation, are touting that this is merely a financial bill that regulates cybers and limits the harm they are doing to public schools. But the fact is that even if you eliminated cybers, over 65% of the families polled said they would not go back to their home district, which most likely wouldn't help solve the financial problem. Too often, education costs are treated as fixed, and school administrators argue that they cannot immediately cut costs when a student leaves their school. Fair enough, but it should also be noted that they don't make the same argument when a student joins their school. They tend to ask for more money, actually, because they're growing. If their costs are fixed, it shouldn't matter either way. If we're being honest about the fiscal effects, school districts would include private school students who are counted as part of the district's average daily membership. They get paid for them, however, they are not there at all. The sending school district only pays for transportation for these students. So if we are being honest about fiscal effects, why aren't they giving us the net? What comes in as in private school children and what goes out as in cyber charter students? This bill forces students in failing schools and students who don't do well in public schools to return to that environment. We talk a lot about anxiety in public school these days. However, that fact seems to go away with this bill. If passed, we will be creating the anxiety we keep saying we need additional funding for. Cybers are a haven for learners who do not thrive in the stressful environment of brick and mortar, especially lately as discipline in schools is waning. These students and teachers have taken the risk to learn differently, and their choice deserves to be respected. My solution is to stop the finger pointing on both sides and create a work group that changes the school funding formula so it is fair for everyone involved. That was never accomplished with the Fair Funding Commission, unfortunately. More money to public schools is not the answer. We have done that with little to show in outcomes. Eliminating cybers is not the answer either. We should be united in giving all learners what they need, and destroying one does not fix the other. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Kozak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I believe that I'm the only cyber charter teacher to be in the chamber ever, which is it's kind of cool, but it's also it brings a perspective I think that a lot of individuals don't have. I've been in the brick and mortar school and the cyber charter setting. I was there for a decade in the cyber charter setting, and you know, there's a lot that we can talk about when it comes to reform, but I think we can do so much better than the way that this was handled. You know, Secretary Rowe was asked during appropriations hearings where this 8,000 figure came from. She couldn't provide a clear answer. Throwing something at the wall and seeing if it sticks or giving this general number without any sort of input, I think, from the other side is frustrating to me. Yes, again, there is places for reform, and you know, school districts right now are asking for this reform, and I understand that totally. But there's also 60,000 students and their families that are asking for a shot and asking for their voices to be heard, as well as the hundreds of thousands that came before them that had great success. The stories that I have of students coming from Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, or the most rural regions of Pennsylvania, I wish they could be here to talk about how the cyber schools changed their lives. And they had the opportunities because they had the funding that was needed in order for them to succeed. This funding bill is, the way that it's set to be funded is not equitable. If we're talking about equity in education, right now, you know, per pupil spending, roughly 70% of whatever the per pupil spend is in a district goes to the cyber school. 70%, not 100%, 70%. And when it comes to places like Philadelphia, roughly, I believe Philadelphia, I've written down here, is roughly 23,000 per pupil spent, $23,000 per pupil spent in Philadelphia. Roughly $16,000 then goes to the cyber school. We're talking 8,000 here we want to fund these kids at. So that's half of what 70% already is. So it doesn't meet this quote unquote equitable talk that we're having. Again, I think there is room for reform here, but it's very frustrating to hear those numbers and not really give any financial backing to it. As well as was explained in the hearings, there were individuals talking about how their school districts fund their cyber charter schools with $5,000 or $6,000. I can tell you that's not possible when you calculate everything else in. Teacher costs, overhead costs. Running these cyber charter schools is running a technology company. There is overhead that's significant that deals with security, information security, learning systems, curriculum development, student information systems. Cyber schools at times have been targeted for cyber attacks, and so this is a big deal. And we are obviously now in a scenario for our kids and our families that they need these options, and technologically we can give it to them. But we've got to do better than what we are doing right now, and just dropping a bill in our laps a couple days ago, not giving us time to respond, and not giving these 60,000 kids a voice. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that time, and I really appreciate you guys considering the kids that are in the school, because they need a voice as well.
Thank you, sir. I have Representative Friel and then Representative Diorsi.
I appreciate this bill coming forward at this time, and I hear the arguments on we picked the number, it's arbitrary, it's $8,000, but I just want to reflect on the Auditor General put out a report of $618 million in fund balance after they've taken in that money. That's taxpayer money, that's property taxpayer money that sits in a fund balance. There's also another cyber charter that had over $318 million in asset purchases, real estate asset purchases. So clearly the funding formula works differently in this public school, as there's no accountability or oversight versus a bricks and mortar public school. And I think bringing parity to the way if cyber charters are public schools to be in parity with every other public school, to have oversight over taxpayer dollars is a completely fair and appropriate thing for us to do, and simply treat them the same. As far as the rate, 8,000, 9,000, I mean, that's a number that's going to be obviously negotiated in the budget between the chambers, and in the future, that number is going to move based on our costs as they move. So take that on the side and say there'll be a number that makes sense. That'll be negotiated between the bodies. But to not represent our taxpayers, to not allow our oversight on taxpayer dollars going to private entities that are sometimes REITs, that are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, that to me is something we should address, and we can't do it soon enough. So I appreciate the bill coming forward, and thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Representative Diorsi and then Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly there's an argument to be made about the process for considering this bill, introduced on a Friday afternoon, slated to be voted on as we speak, as Chairman Cutler alluded to. But my remarks are contained to the content of the bill itself. I read it over the weekend, and I have multiple issues. And as much as I've heard over the last several months about leveling the playing field or providing parity and aligning charters with the same standards that brick and mortar public schools are held to, a concept that many of my Republican colleagues support, including me, this bill doesn't achieve that. It actually singles out 65,000 cyber charter public school kids across the Commonwealth with heavy-handed restrictions. So let's start with the money. There's a lot of attention on the money. So we can start there. Restricting cyber charter public school kids to $8,000 per year is what this bill proposes. Consider that last year in Pennsylvania, we spent over $23,000 per pupil on average on brick and mortar public school. That number, although we're often told that just districts face historic inequities in funding, is good for number 7 in the country. It went up sharply last year. It's risen consistently in recent memory. and the governor has earmarked over $800 million in new spending for this category this year. Historically, we've seen a monumental increase in spending in public ed, not anywhere close to inequity. If inequity exists in Pennsylvania, it's this proposal that slashes cyber charter funding to $8,000, nearly a third of what we spend on brick and mortar public school. Consider also that this bill endeavors to save districts $378 million. That's interesting to be so frugally minded, considering districts are sitting on $7.4 billion in taxpayer-funded reserve accounts. The bill also proposes to restrict the growth of public cyber charters if a school is designated as needing comprehensive support, but it's unclear who designates a district as needing comprehensive support. We talked about leveling the playing field. Well, imagine a brick-and-mortar public school being restricted from growing because of a designation such as this. The bill also prohibits cybers from owning or having any financial interest outside of admin buildings. The standard obviously does not apply to brick-and-mortar schools, according to Section 707 of the Public School Code. The bill additionally implements a moratorium on new cyber charter schools as of next year. So here's my takeaway. We had an opportunity to seriously look at some of the practical steps to take to apply the same standards to public cyber charters as brick-and-mortar public schools, to level the playing field, achieve parity. I was more than open to exploring that legislatively, but that's not what's before us. The bill is a power grab and a money grab, nothing more and nothing less. And I urge a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Anderson.
You know, I think it's really important to discuss how we got here. Early 2000s, No Child Left Behind is one of the biggest disasters in public school policy. I don't believe Representative Schlegel is here today, but he and I were both in the classroom when it came out. It had good intentions. It was supposed to be fair, it was supposed to be equitable, it was supposed to fund education, and what really happened was it ended up a one-size-fits-all. It lowered standards to get kids through, and parents started looking for options. People started fleeing the system. Then fast forward to COVID, a lot of kids went cyber, and as they experienced it, thought, I learned better in cyber school. Now we have 65,000 kids that are enrolled in cyber school. The father of liberal democracy, Edmund Burke, once said, your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment. And he betrays you instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. I think our duty today, and as we consider this bill, is our judgment. But are we basing our judgment on facts? I have repeatedly, I love the fact that we are now talking about everybody being treated the same. At all three hearings, I repeatedly went over, that's all I'm asking for, that we assess and we evaluate brick and mortar, cyber charter, private schools, Christian schools, Catholic schools, the same. HB 1500 does not do that. That is not what its intent is. And let me give you some things that came out of the hearings. Examples that this is simply targeting one educational outlet. And since you're targeting the outlet, you're targeting 65,000 kids and their families. First of all, the witnesses were 4-1 in those in favor of HB 1500. 4-1. What we didn't hear from were cyber teachers until Representative Kozak. Thank you, Representative Kozak. What we didn't hear from is a lot of kids that are in cyber school. We didn't hear from Reverend Robertson, who 10 minutes away, as the leader of Black Pastors United for Education, runs a school with kids that the public school system has failed. How do they deliver that instruction? Cyber school. And if you ever get a chance, I would encourage you to go visit that school and go into those classrooms and see their mentors helping them with cyber school and seeing them teach life lessons and seeing how they struggle to get by. One of these stories that Reverend Robertson told us was a 6th grader came from Harrisburg School District and didn't know how to spell his name. That wasn't because they were underfunded. It's because they were not serving him as a student. It takes more than $8,000 to fund a student at a cyber charter school. This bill would eliminate the opportunity that that young man who could not spell his name in 6th grade had to right the ship. We've been told over and over again that the in-house cybers can do it cheaply. As other representatives have pointed out here, in the hearing, an administrator said that only accounts for the computer and the curriculum. That's it. Doesn't account for teacher benefits, doesn't account for salaries, doesn't account for the administrators to run the program. We have an in-house cyber at the high school that I taught. Costs a lot more than $8,000. It's more than a computer and curriculum. You have to keep the lights on. You have to have a place for them to go. $8,000 will drive these schools out of business. At another hearing, the witnesses in support of a bill like HB 1500 were critical of cyber schools because they only had 50% reading proficiency. I would agree. That is not acceptable. As they were making that argument, we were sitting in a school, a brick and mortar public school, that had a 37% reading proficiency. At another hearing, we were told that cybers are wasting money on buildings that they don't need. They have too many buildings. That was the first hearing. The third hearing, another witness that would support a bill like HB 1500 said that cybers didn't have buildings, and therefore they didn't need the money to run those buildings. Another hearing, advocacy group testifying in support of this bill or a bill like it said that $8,000 could not fund a student at a cyber charter. In fact, they said that it would take $13,000 or $13.5 until it affected the bottom line of any brick and mortar public school. It's unreasonable to have $8,000. That's all we're going to give to these kids. We know it can't fund them. Another hearing, over and over again, all three hearings, we talked about the fund balances as it was mentioned here. What we don't say is, and you're right, they have hundreds of millions of dollars, cyber charters. I don't think there's anybody on this panel on this side of the aisle that doesn't want to look at that and reform it. What we don't talk about is 7.4, as we heard earlier, 7.4 billion in reserves in brick and mortar public school districts. Why are we not looking at both? Because this bill and this agenda targets one outlet and one outlet only that educates 65,000 kids. We mentioned the Auditor General's report. There were actually two of them. One that did criticize the fund balances and other elements of cyber charters. We also had an Auditor General report on brick and mortar public school districts that also criticized the fund balances of school districts. Only they went one step further, saying they had their $7.4 billion in reserves, but we're still raising taxes. In fact, the 12 districts they studied raised taxes 37 times, even with their fund balances. But what is most telling about these hearings are direct statements. Let me just give you a few. Competition has no place in education. We should have a moratorium, which by definition is a prohibition on activity on cyber charter schools. And then finally, if I had my way, we would get rid of all cyber charter schools. Those were quotes directly from witnesses that were called to these to testify and by members of our own committee. I don't know if you've done this, but I visited charter schools. They have buildings. I've been there. I sat in on cyber charter classes. I interviewed teachers, administrators, parents, students, without a stage, without cameras, without drama, without theater, without agendas. I did so because I didn't know. I was unaware of how cyber charters worked. I spent my whole entire life in the public school system. So I wanted to find out what they were all about. What we heard at these hearings and what we continuously hear is not accurate. It's not true. If we are going to make a judgment, a sound judgment, then we have to make that judgment on truth. Nothing we will do this week is more important than this vote and this bill. And quite frankly, I don't care what time of year it is for budget. We need to get it right. And we need to do what's right by those 65,000 kids. My whole reason for running for office was education. It was affirmed by 4 students in a public school brick and mortar classroom when they asked me to speak for them, not just them, but for all of the students, all of the teenagers, all of the kids in the Commonwealth. It's far too important to drop this bill on a Friday afternoon and then expect us to vote on it right now. That is irresponsible, regardless of how it happened. Whether it was intentional, unintentional, frankly, I don't care. That is not how a democracy is supposed to work. That is not how we are supposed to represent the people. Too often, we come into these rooms and into the chamber predetermined how we are going to vote. It has been one of my most shocking revelations here. In fact, on the floor, nobody even listens to the speeches. I expect more out of my 17-year-olds to listen to their classmates make a speech. We don't do that here. Let today be different. The process and preparation for this vote is incomplete. Much of the information gathered and presented has been inaccurate. We are not prepared to make this vote today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Representative McKenzie and then Representative Rosal.
I know I've told my personal story before, and I apologize if I'm repeating it for some, but not everyone knows. But back in the 1970s, I worked for the Whitehall Copley School District as what was called back then a homebound instructor. And I was sent out to different students who, for one reason or another, could not go to school and sit in a classroom. The school was very adamant that these children not have their education interrupted. And so I traveled to the hospitals, to the homes, and I went individually with a stack of books. There were no computers, there were no remote learning possibilities, so I would struggle and go to each kid's house or wherever they were with a stack of books and help them keep up with their education. And these children were an incredible group of kids. Some of them were actually some of the most brilliant kids I've ever taught. Some of them were average and some of them were struggling. But they were just no different than the public school students sitting in any classroom in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And they were valuable. Their education was important. And HB 1500 is trying to paint these students who participate in cyber learning as not worthy of being considered valuable enough to pay an equal amount of money that we would pay to the classroom children. I find it a horribly offensive, harmful, and just a sad commentary how these cyber charter kids are being, displayed as not being worthy of being treated like every other child in Pennsylvania. And we think, it makes it an easy thing to attack a cyber charter school, but you are actually attacking the students. These are children. These are children with all kinds of issues. Even back when I was a homebound instructor, there was a lot of anxiety. There was something called school phobia. You can look it up. It was a psychological determination that the children could not handle going to a school setting. They had anxiety and depression, and sometimes it was manifested in physical illness. And now, after COVID, we hear all about how many kids are suffering from mental illness and mental problems and anxiety. And now we see a larger amount of kids wanting to go to a cyber school, and I have a feeling it might be tied into some of that mental problems that they accumulated during COVID. So that's, maybe one accounting for how many kids. 65,000 is an awful amount of kids. That's an incredible thing. That's the size of a city. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania has like 70,000 people. So we're talking a large number of children that are being affected. And again, during COVID, everybody thought cyber learning was the fabulous thing of the world. The teachers didn't want to go back to school. They kept wanting them to do cyber learning. And now all of a sudden, we're saying cyber learning is not even a good option. So that just blows that argument out of the water as well. And I think it's, again, so sad that these kids are pointed as less than, that they can't learn. I actually just hired in my district office a cyber charter graduate who went on to become an honors student at the University of Pittsburgh. He was the school mascot at the University of Pittsburgh. He's outgoing, he's engaging, he's extremely intelligent and bright. And he is the product of a cyber charter education. And I'm sure there are thousands more like him. But again, some of these kids have medical problems. I used to go to the hospital, the Allentown Hospital, and sit by the children's beds in the hospital children's ward and teach them, because they could not, for one reason or another. One little boy was in a full body cast for a year because he was hit by a car. Another little girl had a very unusual virus that they could not pinpoint what the solution to it was. So she was up and about, walking around the children's ward, dragging her IV behind her and talking to the other kids. But I was there to teach her, and she was so bright and so capable. She was in 5th grade, but we went through the 5th grade math curriculum before Thanksgiving. And I went back to the public school and I said, this little girl is so advanced, could I please have the 6th grade math textbook? And they said, oh no, Mrs. McKenzie, we can't do that, because if she comes back to school, she'll be too far ahead of the other kids. So again, this is just anecdotal, one example, but what I'm trying to enforce in everybody's mind is that these children are just as wonderful, intelligent, and deserving as any child in any classroom in Pennsylvania. We, as a legislature, are fed a consistent diet of propagandized, I would say, emails attacking the cyber charter schools. Week in and week out, I get an email in my inbox saying about all the horrible things about the charter school. the charter school people do not have a lobbyist on their side sending us emails regularly telling us how great they are. But I'm sure they could do the same if they wanted to. So again, think about it not as an entity of a vicious, evil school, but as the children. These are individual children. And if we are declaring that $8,000 per student is enough to fairly educate a student in Pennsylvania, then we'd better look at the overall funding of $23,000 per student. Already, right now, before HB 1500, the cyber charter student is getting $14,000 as opposed to $23,000. This has been an ongoing decision and a continual attack for years now since I've been in the legislature. And the other thing that really gets me upset is the inference that this is going to make our property taxes go down. I encourage every person who pays property taxes to wait for it and watch for it and see if your school district drops your property taxes because they get this influx of money. I am sure that is not going to happen. If it would be, as a property taxpayer myself, I'd be very thrilled. But we do not see that ever happening in Pennsylvania. The school districts consistently demand more money, and then they actually hoard and hold money in reserves too. Just what they're accusing the cyber charter schools of doing. And again, I'm not a money person, so I'm not looking at how they're investing their money, but it has to go to educating the children. When I was a school teacher in a public school district where I had gone to school myself, I had 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, this was in 1973 or 72, that would come to the doorstep of my classroom, and they could not spell Nazareth. They could spell their names, but they could not spell the name of the town we all lived in. And I thought, how on earth had that happened? I had graduated from that school 4 years before. I had gone away to college, did student teaching at William Allen High School with college prep seniors, and was unprepared for a classroom of 100 kids, 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, to come to me who could not spell the town they lived in. They could not read. And I was not prepared to teach them to read. I was an English teacher, not a reading specialist. So the whole education system needs deep, deep reform at every level. Why do we have 250,000 kids graduating with a diploma at the end of a school year, but they can't read at a 3rd grade level? This is the state of education in Pennsylvania, and it is a disgrace. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I have Representative Nelson and then Representative Razzle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this great debate. I think it's apropos that we finish with that question of why we have so many students who aren't performing. The challenge is that our school systems have been underfunded, constitutionally found to be underfunded. Constitutionally found to be underfunded. We can pretend like February 7th, 2023, and the decision by a Commonwealth Court judge is not realistic. I know folks didn't challenge that decision. Our schools are constitutionally underfunded. Constitutionally underfunded. We talk an awful lot about constitutional crises in this country, and there has been one going on in Pennsylvania for some time now, and some could argue since February 8th of 2023, we've been our own constitutional crisis here in Pennsylvania because we are not providing enough funding, not to the 65,000 students who are in cyber charter schools throughout this Commonwealth. Note that there's more students than that in the Philadelphia school district alone, twice, more than that, 3 times that. But the reason why we have such challenges is because our schools are constitutionally underfunded. Understand that this bill is not trying to eradicate cyber charter schools and cyber charter companies. Please remember that this is not an attack on virtual learning. In fact, part of the reason why this bill is so important at a time like this is that so many of our school districts, including, I suspect, Nazareth Area School District, has a virtual program. What we're not doing is attacking virtual learning, and what we're absolutely not doing is trying to demonize students who are looking for educational opportunities. What we're saying is that there, as part of virtual learning, has become a very, very lucrative private industry. And that industry is siphoning dollars away from our school system that is constitutionally underfunded. Constitutionally underfunded school systems. We need money. Somebody owes our school district $6 billion. One of the plaintiffs, lead plaintiffs of this lawsuit, one of the 7 signatory school districts, is saying right now, as they're trying to wrestle with their budget, the William Penn School District, that they're getting ready to cut art and athletics programs. And they were one of the champions. Constitutionally underfunded public education. Again, we're not challenging virtual learning. What we're challenging is an industry that is taking dollars away from not just the parents who choose to send their kids to the school. Those parents are on average spending $2,000, $3,000 a year in that public school system as part of their property taxes, $2,000 or $3,000 on average for public school property taxes. A parent wants to send their child, they can take their $3,000. We could change the funding level right now from $8,000 to $3,000. We can cap it at what that parent's property taxes are and say you could take all of your property taxes, send your student and your property taxes to that cyber charter school right now. We could do that. Understand that public education is a public good. We all hold hands and invest in our public education system. It's not just you as a parent, me as a parent. It's your neighbors, the seniors next door to you. It's the immigrants across the street. It's the young couple who doesn't have kids around the corner. They all hold hands and invest in the education system for your individual child. We have a responsibility to the system, first and foremost. The system of public education works when we invest in it. Somebody owes that system $6 billion. And in fact, that somebody, all of us sitting around that table right now. So if what we're trying to do is make sure that we aren't allowing the dollars to leach out of the state's coffers to invest in that public education system by going into private enterprise, by going into companies and their real estate holdings, if what we're going to do is say that this isn't going to be a boon for marketing companies so that they can advertise, if what we're going to do is say we're going to try and invest every dollar that we can muster to those students that you taught 50 years ago, to those students that you taught now. We have an infrastructure to do that. We have a public education system. We have virtual learning opportunities. We have all of these things. It is right that we hold our responsibility to making sure the system has the resources and the accountability that it needs. This bill is providing that accountability. It is not leaching those resources. It is making sure that we are not having a wide open hole where dollars are flowing out and the education system that the other 1.2 million Pennsylvania children are counting on is left just crumbling. Somebody owes us $6 billion. It's us. $6 billion. And I'm probably shortchanging. I am so happy that we're voting on this bill. Let's get this going.
Thank you, sir. Representative Razzle, and then Representative Youngs and Prokopiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we established during these hearings, state dollars following the students rather than the institutions would eliminate nearly all of the problems that we are presented with. I maintain that belief and do not believe that this bill covers this in any way, shape, or form. Therefore, I am a no. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Young, and then Representative Prokopiak.
I appreciate the words of Chairman Nelson because he did take the brunt of what I am feeling as well. Sometimes being up here feels like I'm trapped in a twilight zone. We are talking about, I know the maker of this bill said 487 out of 500 districts. 487 out of 500 districts thought this was a good piece of legislation. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talking about what's equitable and what's fair. And what's admittedly frustrating to me is that since I've been here, that's what we've been talking about. And what Chairman Nelson brought up was the lawsuit that had to come because of the unwillingness of this body to pass equitable and fair legislation around education. So 65,000 families are included in this 487 districts out of 500. So as we are believing in our minds that we are trying to invest in the children in this Commonwealth, let's actually actualize that by making sure that when we're talking about equal and equitable education, we're talking about all children in this Commonwealth. The greater whole, the greater good of the whole is what should be the focus right here. And so I will say that when we come to this space, hopefully the goal is for us to legislate in a fair and a just way. However, for the purpose of sound bites, I will encourage us to make sure that our records actually follow the words that we put up when we speak it on this microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Prokopiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll try to be brief, and I appreciate all the comments from all the members who have spoken. So when I look at this bill, I think about accountability, and it was discussed that there are two Auditor General reports, one dealing with public schools and one with the charter schools. Well, as someone who represents part of one of the districts that was in the public Auditor General report, I can tell you there were serious repercussions and discussion in that school district, in front of the school board, and talking to that administration about what that Auditor General report said. Because those school board members and that administration are beholden to the taxpayers of that district. I haven't seen that type of discussion with the cyber charters. That's our responsibility, our accountability to the taxpayers. That is our taxpayers' money going to those cyber charters. When a school district decides to buy a building, they have to jump through hoops. They go through, if they're going to build a building, if they're going to close a building, it's vetted. Residents have their say. Taxpayers have their say. Parents have their say. That's their local school districts. And believe me, as a former school board member, they have their say. And it's months and years of say in those types of things. We don't see that in the cyber charters, frankly. They can just, I mean, honestly, we see it in the Auditor General's report. Purchasing buildings they don't have to justify it to the public. Public school board member has to justify it to the public. A school administrator has to justify it to the public. Or else they lose their job, because that's what we believe in local control in the state. We need some accountability to the taxpayers. We also need accountability to the children. You know, we have to look at, you know, when we sit there and we heard testimony that they're, in general, cyber charters metrics, their test scores are lower, their graduations are lower. And they said, well, there's reasons for that. Well, in every school district, they'll say there's reasons for that. But the bottom line is, if any kid is failing, it's our responsibility to do the best job to educate those kids. That is our constitutional duty. So I'm in favor of accountability for the taxpayers and for our children, so I'm a yes vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Going once, going twice. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, and I want to thank everybody for their comments today. Following up on what some of my colleagues said, this is about accountability, and it is about public money. And with regard to some of the comments regarding fund balances, well, when you have a fund balance by a school district, it's run by the duly elected school board. And so they are been elected stewards for the money that goes to them and how they deal with it, and they reserve money or for capital projects or anything else, they're responsible to that. Fund balance is going to a private institution, and they're keeping it without accountability to the school district or the taxpayer that put that money in, is what we're trying to address in this legislation. With regard to children who want to have cyber education, they are choosing to go to these cyber charter schools, but they also have cyber options through their own school district. And the oversight for the school districts is much more stringent than current oversight of the cyber charter schools. And part of this legislation is making sure that there's parity with that with regard to the Department of Education and the oversight availability to the private charter schools that are operated, again, with all the public dollars. As I've said, we have school districts all over this Commonwealth that have asked for these reforms. We have had a robust discussion here today, and I hope that you will understand where we're coming from this, even if you don't agree with it, and I ask for an affirmative vote. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And for a second time, Chair Cutler, and then I'll have some closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate the debate and the opportunity to, dive into some of the pieces of this bill, but I do feel the need to address a couple points that were raised, particularly as a named party in the lawsuit in my capacity as Speaker. The court case, when they were talking about funding, they were very careful not to get into the actual amount per student, which is important. Because the court really does not sit on the purse strings or the appropriating powers. So they were very mindful of that. What they did dive into, however, is really how that money is distributed. They talked about the history and how that money ended up in different districts for a variety of reasons over time. And I think it's important to note, if the discussion, as it was categorized, if it was constitutionally underfunded, which that is not what that case said, and that's very important. It said we had to evaluate how we fund our school systems. And they have kind of, distorted it into this discussion of constitutionality. What was unconstitutional is the distribution of the money, not the amount per student, and that is a huge distinction. The second piece is, if that were true and it was ruled to be, unconstitutional from the standpoint of an overall funding scheme, I would simply point out that the cyber rates are themselves a percentage of the home district's spend. So if the top spend is unconstitutional or not enough, then a percentage that is smaller than that also would fail to meet that standard. And that really is where I have issues with this bill. It arbitrarily picks a number. It picks an $8,000 number, and it moves it forward. And that really is barely over 1/3 of what our state average is today. And it's not one grounded in actual expenses, because I don't feel like we were able to actually dive into that. There was a lot of discussion about the Auditor General's report. It's important to note that that report focused on 5 schools that predated the changes that were voted last year, that were somewhere north of $190 million in cost shifting and savings. So that report is no longer a firm foundation on which to base a bill. And the last piece is this. During my time as leader and speaker, we also actually worked on the funding formula, because this was an important issue. We have, for some time, had an issue with hold harmless in the Commonwealth, which is a huge disparate treatment of school districts across the state. Some districts received more money than they should have. Many received much less. That new funding formula was actually based and agreed on and voted on by this General Assembly. And it dealt primarily with growth and actual costs. And while it was not perfect, it did account for some flexibility at the local level. Now, what we have seen in the governor's proposal, partnered with this, is a newfound focus on adequacy gap. The adequacy gap was a part of that discussion, but it was not part of the funding formula. If we're going to drive new money through education, it should be on the agreed upon formula. But I will say the quiet part out loud. The funding formula, as drafted, would really only help about 150 school districts. The adequacy gap discussion helps north of 350. So we're right back to the discussion of how money is distributed and arguably not in compliance with the court order. And that is a huge, huge problem because the focusing on the adequacy gap was one component of the discussions, not the entirety. The governor's proposal proposes to drive it predominantly through here, very little into BEF, which hurts those growing school districts with a low tax base. You don't need to look any further than Lancaster County. I happen to live in one of those. I live in Solanco School District, which consistently ranks 3rd or 4th in need. We already pay an income tax that is 0.65% higher than everybody else in the Commonwealth because we shifted to that. So it's a total of it's a total of this is outrageous, 1.2%. It's hundreds of percent higher than everybody else in the Commonwealth. And yet, in this new approach, our richest school districts in Lancaster County get the money, not the poor ones, like Solanco or Elanco, comparatively speaking. And that is where not just this bill falls short, but the entirety of the discussion. And that is my frustration. I'm all for accountability. I'm all for having a real discussion about what it costs to educate a student. And most importantly, I am very focused on what those outcomes are. Because if the discussion is these schools, cyber schools, perform poorly, therefore we should either have a moratorium or shut them down, we have plenty of public schools that are not currently meeting those very same standards. And that, Mr. Chairman, is where I'm at. I'm open to having a discussion. This bill's not it. I urge my members to be a no vote.
Thank you, sir. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the maker of the legislation for her tireless work on this topic. I'd like to thank our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, regardless of how you feel about this particular legislation or any pieces or portions of this legislation, because not only was today a good conversation, not only was it a robust conversation, but I think we need to take a step back and acknowledge these topics get heated. They also get highly political. And there were nobody was personally attacked. There was nothing about the conversation today that, speaking for myself, that I found inappropriate or offensive. I would challenge some assertions that were made, but that's normal course of a conversation and a debate, and that's absolutely fine. So I genuinely appreciate folks coming together. I also appreciate the members who were able to participate either personally or in person or virtually to our 3 cyber hearings. I'd also like to thank the members that we had them across the Commonwealth. Representative Anderson, I think you were the only rank and file member that was at all 3. Is he still here? He is. So he got our gold star for travel. So thank you for that, sir. I'd also like to thank, because everybody wants a gold star from me, I understand that. I'd also like to thank members who participated in the education hearings in Harrisburg, where we heard from the Secretary of Education. We also, during that period, we also heard from our Auditor General, who I would just like to remind everybody for the record is in fact a registered Republican and a Republican elected official here in the Commonwealth. I just would like to quote a little bit from from the executive summary of his report that was issued on February 7th, 2025. We also found that each of this is on page 2 of the executive summary. We also found that each of the 5 cyber charter schools improved its financial position during the audit, as evidenced by accruing fund balances That increased $365 million, or 144%, from $254 million as of July 1, 2020, to $619 million as of June 30th. While it is essential that cyber charter schools maintain an adequate fund balance in case of a revenue shortfall or unanticipated expenditures, these amounts should be, in bold, reasonable for a public school entity that relies on taxpayer funds, including local tax revenues derived in part from property taxes. It goes on and says, we believe the fund issue is the outcome of the CSL's funding formula as discussed above, which raises important questions about the need for more reasonable and logical approach to funding. We found uncommon expenditures from cyber charter schools during our review that included spending related to staff bonuses, gift cards, vehicle payments, and fuel stipends. We also found, and even though it's a public entity, just for sake of continuing the decorum of this, I'll leave the name of the school out. We also found one of the schools transferred $354.3 million from its general fund to its capital projects fund during the audit period, of which $196 million was spent to purchase and/or renovate 21 buildings, which could be considered uncommon for a public cyber charter school. The overall results of this audit raised concerns over the funding formula for providing tuition payments to the cyber charter schools for regular and special education students, with excessive fund balances being accumulated by those cyber charter schools. Our department has recommended changes to the tuition funding formula in the CSL in 3 separate special reports under the past 2 Auditor Generals, dating back to the first special report issued in September 2010. Our department urges the Governor, the General Assembly, and PDE to take action on the recommendations provided in this audit report regarding the funding formula. Also like to thank our colleagues for being present at the Governor's budget address in early February. For those members who were members last session, and I understand we have a number of new members, but for last session, I'd also like to thank you for being present on the floor debate about cyber education last year, where we passed, I believe it was House Bill 1422, but I could be wrong. But it was a comprehensive debate then on cyber education. I'd like to thank the members that were here for last year's budget, and I'd like to thank our colleagues from the State Senate for incorporating a number of those changes into the budget vote. The reason why I'm thanking my members is this isn't a new conversation. Our Republican Auditor General cites the first special report issued in September of 2010. I'm a chair. I wasn't even a member in September of 2010. And my point is, this isn't a new conversation. These aren't new ideas. They have been voted on by General Assemblies. They have been discussed. In fact, if I recall correctly, there was a cyber bill in the years before when the GOP was in the majority that almost got across the finish line as well. None of this is new. None of this data is new. None of these conversations are new. The only thing, but more importantly than none of these conversations are new, the thing that is the oldest part about all of this is what the Auditor General says when he says he urges the Governor and General Assembly and PDE to take action. We haven't taken action on this in a long time. Taken small actions. I'm sorry. I would like to correct myself there. There is an overwhelming demand from our school districts, our taxpayers, our parents, our families, to make sure that we are looking out for the best interest of all of our students, that we are looking out for the interest of all of our taxpayers. And there is an overwhelming desire for action. So are we going to do something? Or are we going to continue to study, to talk, to do these things? We have done, in a bipartisan manner, an exceptional job of having this conversation. When Democrats were in the majority, when the Republicans have been in the majority. When a Democratic governor proposes changes, when a Republican Auditor General suggests changes. When we've put up votes in the House, in the Senate, and on concurrence from budgets. We've done all of the hard work on this one. The last hard and difficult thing to do is say yes or no. And I'm asking for a yes vote on House Bill 1500. And with that, we will take a roll call.
Chairman Schweier.
Yes.
Representatives Abney,
Yes by designation.
Curry,
Yes by designation.
Friel. Isaacson. Kazim.
Yes by designation.
Nelson.
Yes by designation.
Omara.
Yes by designation.
Friel Otten.
Yes by designation.
Probst.
Yes by designation.
Prokopiak. Smith Waddell.
Yes by designation.
Takak.
Yes by designation.
Yun.
Yes by designation.
Chairman Cutler.
No.
Representatives Anderson.
No.
Cooper. Diorsi.
No.
Gleim.
No.
Kozak.
No by designation.
McKenzie. Ortitai. Rosal.
No.
Schlegel.
No by designation.
Shalaba.
No by designation.
Watro. The ayes are 14, the nays are 12.
Thank you, sir. House Bill 1500 will be reported as committed. Seeing no further business before the committee, we'll have a voting meeting. I'm kidding. Seeing no further meeting before the committee, this voting meeting is adjourned.